Today, we're going to be looking at a skill, what's known as photo analysis. Now, I've understood that from Mr. Mouska and Mr. Sheldon, you just finished your unit looking at African American civil rights, okay, 1950s, 1960s. You're going to be moving into the Native American movement. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the Native American movement, but we're going to look at a way to learn a little bit about it through looking at a photograph, okay? Now, in our modern world, you guys, I know it's no surprise to you, are bombarded with visual information. Images are everywhere. And they help define what our reality is, from the Snapchats that you guys do, don't tell me about them, to the visual images you see online. Now, a lot of us, adults included, see photographs as strictly two-dimensional objects. We look at it, oh, that's what it was, we move on. But really, photographs, especially really well-done photography, can give us a lot more depth. One, it can help us better understand the world. Two, it can help us develop empathy for other people who we may see as different than us. And when we go through and look in depth at these photographs, we may find out that those two-dimensional ideas we had aren't true. That really, the photograph has three dimensions to it. It has depth. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, by the end of this lesson, you're going to learn how to run through a photo analysis and how to garner that deep information about a topic from a single photograph. So, let's start. Now, the secret to doing a photo analysis, any photograph, is to observe. Now, I know what you're thinking. Observe, I observe all the time. But I mean really look and study the image. Okay? Up here we have a great photograph that has a lot of things going on in it. So I want you to take just a few moments and just look at it. What do you notice? Okay? Just in your mind think, what do you notice? Now, sometimes it is helpful to divide a photograph into quadrants. Okay? Now, if you have access to a photograph that you can actually write on, I'd recommend, draw the lines. If you can't, either it's online or it's a historical photograph and you don't want to graffiti it, just use your mind. Okay? Divide it into quadrants. Now, take a look at each of the quadrants. Do you notice anything more that you might have missed the first time? Again, I'd like you to just think about this in your mind. Okay. Now, first of all, we're going to write down what is observed, what we see. And then I'm going to show you my thinking and how I'm able to get more depth out of it. So first of all, let's start with what we see. Okay? The first thing that jumped out at me is all the painted words. Okay? That leapt out in my mind. So I'm probably going to want to write down those items. So for example, at the very top, we see Indians welcome. Below that, we see in even larger letters, Indian land. And then you'll notice, in the middle, the sign itself says Alcatraz Island. Okay? So that gives us a place. Let's write that down. But we also notice that it's been changed. Where it said United States property, it now says United Indian property. And then we see some things that have been painted out, and below it, allowed ashore without a pass. Okay. Now, the other thing that jumps out in the photograph for me are the 8 individuals down at the bottom. Okay? So we'll want to make note of that. There are 8 people. And when we look at the people, we take a look at their clothing. We notice their clothing is varied. Okay? So we'll write that down. We notice the gentleman on the far right seems to be wearing something out of the Old West. He's got a cowboy hat on, he's got a poncho on, so we see kind of a traditional Western clothing. Then we see 2 individuals next to him wrapped in a blanket. And then finally, many of the individuals on the left-hand side are wearing military jackets. Okay? Now, that's not all there is to see with these individuals. Okay? We look very closely. We can see this individual here is carrying a mug. What's in it? We don't know. But there is a mug in his hand. And then last thing I noticed about them, they are looking in different directions. Okay? They all seem to be looking at different points. Now, the reason why I didn't ask you what you saw is because we can all see these things. That's not the skill we're working on. We'll be working on what does this mean. Okay? And this is where inferencing comes in. Inferencing is a skill that will serve you beyond photographs. And it's a simply stated skill, but a complex one to do. All inferencing is you take what you see with what you already know and combine it together to come up with meaning. Okay, that's all inferencing is. Like I said, it's easy to say, it's more challenging to do. Oftentimes, if we connect more than one observation together with our prior knowledge, we can get an even deeper understanding. Okay? So, I'm going to give you an example of how this works. Over here we have lots of things. Lots of observations. First thing that I want to do, I want to start with our 8 people. You know what? Let's try this marker. And we notice that we have 8 people standing below something that refers to Native Americans. Now, what I do is I combine that with my own prior knowledge, my own experience having interacted with Native Americans. And when I look at them, they resemble some of the Native Americans that I've come across in my own life. So I'm inferring that these 8 individuals are Native Americans, based on what I've already known and what I see. Okay? Let's look at another one. The location here, Alcatraz. Alcatraz is in the middle of San Francisco Harbor. Okay? If there's one thing I know about San Francisco, it is cold. That its average high temperature year-round is about 53 degrees. It has to do with the Pacific current coming off the coast. Keeps it cold year-round. Okay? When I combine that with what I see with their clothing here, I can tell that this would be a rather cold place to be. But then I also look at Alcatraz. What I know about Alcatraz, it's no longer serving as a prison. It had been decommissioned in the 1950s. So they probably don't have great central heating. When I combine my knowledge about the temperature of San Francisco, the clothing I see them wear, and my knowledge of the history of the island, I can probably infer this was not an easy place for these individuals to be. It was probably a challenge to stay warm, perhaps a challenge to continue going on. And then I want to connect one more item. You notice they're at Alcatraz. But we see right below the sign identifying it as Alcatraz as Indian land. Well, now that's interesting. Why would Native Americans claim an abandoned prison as Indian land? Well, when I think about my own knowledge of Native Americans, I know in the 19th century that they were placed on reservations, that they couldn't leave. Prisoners are put into prisons where they don't have the option to leave. Perhaps they see this as symbolic, that this prison is much like their own lives, that they're stuck in a place that they can't leave. I don't know that for certain, but maybe that's what they're hinting at. Now, I want to give you a chance to try this out, okay, to do some inferencing of your own. So if you would, I'd like for you to get out a piece of paper. If you want to split it with somebody, that's fine. This isn't going to be an extended writing.
Oh, yeah.
What?
Huh? You got a whole notebook there? Yeah.
All right, so here's what I'd like for you to do. If I can have your attention back, please. We didn't talk much about the sign, okay, and how it had been changed. I'd like for you to get together with somebody you're sitting next to and have a real brief discussion, not long, real brief, about why do you think the sign was changed. Use what you see, what they changed the sign to, with your own prior knowledge, what you already know about this topic or these individuals. What sort of conclusions might you come up with? So go ahead and just talk to somebody right next to you.
Well, to me, personalize it. Because their homes have been taken from them, so they were taking something and making it their own.
Maybe they did it so it was like, it's not United States property that the Indians are living on, it's Indian
Also, they
property.
probably would have called them.
Because it was originally theirs to begin with.
It would probably be like a certain tribe or something.
You can like take them in my file.
I'm just confused as to why in the first place. That sign, if it's not functioning as a prison, I'm just wondering, like, are they visitors? Are
Can
they?
we write that down?
All right, like I said, I'm not going to give you a lot of time to do this, I just want you to do it real quick. Is there a partnership who would be willing to share their inference? I know it's frightening to speak. But is there a partnership that would just throw something out there? I think it looks like the table right here in front of me is eager to share their thinking with us. What'd you come up with, guys?
Okay, well, we said that they like marked it as their territory because to begin with, the United States was technically their land, but then they were kicked out of it. so they wanted to make something their own again, kind of ish.
Okay, and so what are you basing that off of? Well, first, what are you seeing?
I see that it says like Indian land and like United States was originally their land and it says United Indian Property.
Okay, so we see that they've changed the sign to read United Indian Property and below it Indian Land. Now, based on your prior knowledge, how'd you make that connection? You had talked about how it was originally their land, right?
Yes, the
Okay.
United States government settlers kicked the Indians out of their homes.
Okay, so the partnership here is inferring that these individuals are reclaiming land that might have been once theirs. I think that's a great inference. Is there another partnership that would be willing to share one? Oh, we've broken the seal. How about the table back in the corner? Gentlemen, what did you come up with?
Well, the people look stern, and I just know that because of my interactions with people in general. Their facial shapes, etc. Like they look pretty defiant of what's happening. Like they're kind of on the defensive, and that can be probably inferred also through the text that they're taking over.
Okay, and so then what does this tell you about this event?
It's kind of like a retaliation amongst the Indian people.
Okay, all right, good, good. Let's try. Now, to wrap this up, you'll notice I gave you an example of inferencing. Working with a partner, you developed an example of inferencing. Now, I want you on your own to do one. So what I'd like you to do on your piece of paper, I want you to write down, what do you observe? It could be from this list, it could be something we haven't even talked about. Remember, you can combine more than one observation together. So write what you observe on one side, write your prior knowledge on the other side, and then below that, what are you inferring from both of those things? Okay? So on one side, write what you see. On another side, write what you know about what you see. And remember, it could be anything. If you wrote down, I saw a bird, well, I know birds can fly. You know, it can be anything that you know about the topic. And then try to connect them together with an inference that you can read this photograph from. All right, I see a lot of us coming to a close or having finished with our inference already. The last part of doing a photo analysis is recognizing what we don't get from the photograph. Okay? What answers are we unable to have right now?
The time period.
Asking questions is probably the most important thing you can do when you're inferring from any document, be it a photograph or some text. Nobody knows all of the answers. We all know this. It's when we ask questions that we start to become more intelligent and we start to become more knowledgeable of what's going on in the world. So, the last thing I want you to do is think about, well, what isn't this photograph telling me that I might want to know? I'll give you an example for myself. When I looked at this photograph and I saw these individuals here, I asked myself, well, is this it? Is there only 8 people who are part of this group? Or are there more individuals? The photo doesn't tell me that. What I'd like for you to do is think about, well, what sort of question is left in your mind? I'd like you to write that down. Then, I would like you to think about, well, how would I find the answer? Now, it is really simple to write down, well, I'll ask Mr. Noska or Mr. Sheldon. Or, I'll search the internet. I'd like you to be more specific than that. If you're gonna rely on the internet, great. But what are you going to use as a search query? Now, do you believe that if you typed in, were there only 8 people on Alcatraz who were Native Americans, that you're gonna get much in return? Probably not. So you're gonna have to be somewhat specific in your search criteria, but not too specific. Okay, or even if you talk to Mr. Noska or Mr. Sheldon. Okay, so I'd like you to finish up with what is your question, and how might you go about finding the answer to that question? When you're finished, I'll take them. You don't have to put your name on it unless you really claim your work, but I'd like to take a look at what you wrote.